The Cosmic Emperor had ruled the 17 galaxies for 9,000 years. His species, were tall creatures with gray skin and 3 red eyes that glowed in the dark. They had conquered more worlds than anyone could count. They had broken more species than the stars could number. And in all that time had learned one simple truth: fear was the only language that lasted. The human colony ship Endeavour was not supposed to be in space. It had made a wrong turn near the Helix Nebula, a simple navigation error that would change the course of history. The ship carried 12,000 colonists heading to a new world. They were farmers and teachers and doctors and engineers. They were families looking for a fresh start. Among them were 5,731 children. Admiral Grace was 53 years old. She had served in the Colonial Defense Force for 30 years. She had gray hair that she kept short and eyes that had seen too much death. When the warships surrounded the Endeavour, she knew there was nothing she could do. Her ship had no weapons. Her people had no defenses. She ordered everyone to stay calm. She told them help would come. She lied because that was all she could do. The boarding parties came through the airlocks like a wave of darkness. They were efficient and cold. They did not speak to the humans. They simply began to separate them. Adults to one side, children to another. Grace watched from the bridge as families were torn apart. She heard mothers screaming. She heard fathers begging. She heard children crying for their parents. The sounds cut through her like knives. An officer approached her. He was taller than the others, and his uniform had golden marks on the shoulders. He looked at her the way a person might look at an insect. "You are the leader," he said. His voice came through a translation device that made his words sound flat and empty. "I am Admiral Grace," she said. "These people are civilians. They are not soldiers. They have done nothing wrong." The officer did not respond. He simply turned and walked away. The mane flickered to life, and Grace saw a face that would haunt her for the rest of her short life. The Cosmic Emperor sat on a throne made of something that looked like black glass. His 3 red eyes stared out from the screen with an intelligence that was cold and ancient. "Admiral," he said, "your species has become troublesome." Grace straightened her back. She was afraid, more afraid than she had ever been, but she would not let him see it. "We have done nothing to you," she said. "We were simply passing through. This ship carries families, children, they are innocent." Made a sound that might have been laughter. Innocent, yes, that is precisely why they are useful. Grace felt her blood turn to ice. "What do you mean?" "Humanity has spread across 47 worlds," said. "You have resisted our expansion. You have fought our trade agreements. You have refused to accept your place in the natural order of the galaxy. This is unacceptable." "We have a right to exist," Grace said. "We have a right to grow." "Rights are given by those with power," replied. "You have no power, therefore you have no rights, but you have something else. You have hope, and I intend to take it from you." The sounds from below decks changed. Grace heard the children being moved. She heard heavy doors closing. She heard something that sounded like machinery starting up. "What are you doing?" she asked. Her voice was shaking now. She could not stop it. "I am sending a message," said. "Your 47 worlds need to understand what resistance costs. They need to feel it in their bones for generations. They need to know that opposing the Empire brings consequences that cannot be forgotten." Grace tried to move toward the door. 2 guards grabbed her arms and held her in place. She struggled, but they were too strong. "Please," she said. The word came out before she could stop it. "Please, they are children. They have done nothing. Kill me instead. Kill all the adults, but let the children go." Looked at her with something that might have been curiosity. "Your offer is noted and rejected. The adults will be released. They will return to human space. They will tell everyone what happened here, and the memory of this day will break your species forever." The screaming started then. It came up through the floor, through the walls, through every part of the ship. Grace heard it and something inside her shattered. She fell to her knees, but the guards held her up. She counted the time. She counted the screams. She counted the silences that followed each one. It took 4 hours. When it was over, appeared on the screen again. His robes were clean. His expression was calm. He looked satisfied, the way someone might look after finishing a good meal. 5,731, he said. I had them counted. I want you to remember that number, Admiral. I want you to carry it with you for the rest of your life. And when you return to your people, I want you to tell them this. The Empire does not forgive. The Empire does not forget. And the Empire does not show mercy to those who resist. Grace looked at the screen. Tears ran down her face. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was broken in ways that could never be healed. But something else was growing inside her, something hot and dark and patient. Why? She asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. Tilted his head. Because I can. Because your species needed to learn its place. Because fear is the only language that lasts. Because I have done this 1,000 times before and it has always worked. He waited. He had seen this moment many times across 9,000 years. The conquered always reacted the same way. They begged, they raged, they threatened, and then they broke. Grace did not beg, she did not rage, she did not threaten. She simply looked at him, and then she said one word. Remember. Waited for more, a curse, a promise of revenge, something he could understand. But Grace said nothing else. She simply looked at him with those wet human eyes, and she repeated the word. Remember. 2 days later, the surviving adults were put on shuttles and sent back to human space. Grace was among them. She did not speak during the journey. She simply sat and stared at nothing. But her lips moved sometimes, forming a single word over and over again. Remember. The shuttles reached human space 1 week later. The survivors told their stories. They spoke of what they had seen. They spoke of what they had heard. They spoke of 5,731 children who would never come home. And they spoke of a single word that an admiral had said to an emperor. The word spread across 47 worlds. It was whispered in homes and shouted in streets. It was written on walls and carved into stone. It became a prayer and a promise and a warning all at once. Remember. Humanity had received its message. Now it was time to write a reply. The word traveled faster than any spaceship could carry it. It moved through communication networks and whispered conversations. It spread from world to world, from city to city, from person to person. Within 1 month, every human in the galaxy had heard it. Remember. Did not understand the word. He had his best language experts study it. He had his telepaths probe the minds of the surviving humans before they were released. He searched the ancient archives of his for hidden meanings. They found nothing special. It was just a word, an order to keep something in your mind, a command to not forget. The Emperor dismissed it as the desperate cry of a broken woman. He turned his attention to other matters. The 17 galaxies had many problems that needed his wisdom. Humanity was just one small annoyance among thousands. He did not see what the word was doing to human civilization. In Chicago, on Earth, a man named Daniel Cooper sat in his kitchen for 3 days after he heard the news. He did not eat. He did not sleep. He did not move. He simply stared at a photograph on his refrigerator. The photograph showed a little girl with brown hair and a gap-toothed smile. Her name was Amy. She was 9 years old. She had wanted to be a veterinarian on the new colony world. She had packed her favorite toy, a stuffed rabbit she called Captain Bounce, in her travel bag. Amy had been on the Endeavor. On the 4th day, Daniel stood up. He showered, he shaved, he put on clean clothes, and he went to work. Daniel was a software engineer. He designed navigation systems for civilian spacecraft. He was good at his job, perhaps one of the best in the field, but he had never thought of his work as important. It was just a way to pay the bills. Now he had a purpose. He began to work on something new, something that no one had ever attempted before. A way to travel through a dimension that they had declared impossible to navigate. It would take years, maybe decades, but Daniel had patience now. He had all the patience in the world. His daughter had taught him that. Every night when she was alive, she had asked him the same question at bedtime. "Daddy, will you remember to check for monsters?" And every night he had checked her closet and under her bed, even though they both knew there were no monsters there. Now there were monsters, real ones, and Daniel would spend the rest of his life finding a way to reach them. In Houston, a woman named Lane received a different kind of news. Her twin sons and Leo had been on the Endeavor. They were 11 years old. They had been so excited about the colony ship. They had talked about nothing else for months. She spent her career studying alien life forms. She cataloged their bodies, their behaviors, their strengths, and their weaknesses. She had always approached her work with scientific calm. Emotions had no place in the laboratory. That calm died with her sons. She began a new research project. She told no one about it. She worked at night in a private laboratory that she paid for with her own money. She studied everything she could find about their biology, their medicine, their food, their environment. Every species had weaknesses, was going to find these weaknesses, and then she was going to exploit them. Across the 47 human worlds, similar scenes played out. Parents who had lost children, grandparents who had lost, teachers who had taught the dead, doctors who had healed them, friends who had played with them. Each one heard the word. Each one responded in their own way. A retired military commander named Victor began to train young people in secret. He taught them tactics and strategy and patience. He called them his students, but he thought of them as something else. Weapons. A factory owner named Sandra Bell converted her business. On the surface, she still made farming equipment. But underground, in hidden rooms that did not appear on any blueprint, she made other things. Things that would not be needed for many years. A teacher named Collins changed her lessons. She still taught history and mathematics and science, but now she also taught her students to think, to plan, to wait, to remember. They had spies in human space. They watched and listened and reported back to their masters. They saw humans going about their normal lives, working, playing, raising families, building homes. The spies saw nothing unusual. Humanity seemed peaceful, broken, afraid. They did not see the conversations that happened in basements and back rooms. They did not see the research projects in hidden laboratories. They did not see the factories buried deep underground. They did not see the children being raised with a single purpose. Received reports every year. His advisors told him that humanity was learning its lesson. The massacre of the Endeavor had worked, just as similar massacres had worked on 1,000 other species. The Emperor was pleased. He had been right as always. Fear was the only language that lasted. But was 9,000 years old. He had seen many things, and somewhere in the back of his ancient mind, a small doubt began to grow. He remembered the woman on the admiral with tears on her face and steel in her eyes. He remembered the words she had spoken. Remember. Other species had threatened him. They had promised revenge. They had sworn to destroy him. He had heard it all before, but none of them had simply told him to remember. What did it mean? He pushed the doubt away. It was nothing. Humans were weak. They would fade into history like all the others. On the 20th anniversary of the Endeavor massacre, humans across all 47 worlds observed a moment of silence. It lasted exactly 5,731 seconds, 1 second for each child. Observers noted the ceremony. They reported it as a sign of ongoing grief, a broken people remembering their dead. They did not understand that it was something else. It was a countdown. Daniel Cooper finished his navigation system that year. It worked. Ships could now travel through dimensions that they could not detect or follow. Lane completed her biological research. She had found the weaknesses she was looking for, all of them. Victor's students had grown up. They were soldiers now, trained in ways that no military academy had ever imagined. Sandra Bell's hidden factories had produced enough equipment to arm 1,000,000 troops. And Collins had raised a generation of children who knew exactly why they existed. The word had done its work. It had spread through human civilization like roots through soil. It had changed everything without appearing to change anything. Remember, it was not a cry of despair. It was not a sign of weakness. It was not the last word of a broken woman. It was a promise. And humanity always kept its promises. 20 years passed like water flowing under a bridge. The Empire grew stronger. It conquered 3 more galaxies and added them to its domain. The Cosmic Emperor celebrated his 9,000th and 20th anniversary with a festival that lasted 40 days. During those 20 years, humanity was quiet. The silence was so complete that analysts began to write papers about it. They called humanity the perfect example of successful pacification. They pointed to the Endeavour massacre as proof that extreme measures worked. Other species should be treated the same way, they argued. Break them early, break them completely, and they will never rise again. Read these papers and nodded with approval. His method had worked, as it always did. Fear was the only language that lasted. But the Emperor was old and wise, and wisdom sometimes brings doubt. He remembered things that his younger advisors did not. He remembered species that had been quiet for centuries before they struck. He remembered rebellions that had seemed impossible until the day they happened. He ordered increased surveillance of human space. His spies doubled their efforts. They watched human cities from orbit. They listened to human communications. They infiltrated human organizations. They studied human culture with the dedication of scientists examining a new specimen. They found nothing. Humans went to work. They raised their children. They built their modest homes. They pursued their small dreams. They paid their taxes to the empire without complaint. They obeyed every rule and followed every regulation. The spies reported that humanity was broken beyond repair. The fire had gone out of them. They were no longer a threat to anyone. The spies were wrong. They did not see Daniel Cooper's laboratory, hidden 3 miles beneath the surface of a moon that appeared on no official maps. They did not see the ships being built there, ships that could move through dimensions they did not believe existed. They did not see Lane's biological weapons, stored in containers that looked like ordinary medical supplies. They did not see the agents she had designed, invisible killers that would attack only tissue and leave everything else untouched. They did not see the soldiers training in underground bases on 100 different worlds. They did not see the weapons being manufactured in factories that existed only in the spaces between official records. They did not see the children. The children of the survivors were different from their parents. They had been raised with a purpose. From the day they were born, they had been taught that they were part of something larger than themselves. They learned patience before they learned to walk. They learned planning before they learned to read. They learned that revenge was not a hot emotion but a cold one, something to be prepared over decades and served precisely at the right moment. These children grew up and had children of their own, and those children were taught the same lessons. The word passed down through generations like a genetic code. Remember, it was the first word many of them learned. It was written in their nurseries and spoken at their dinner tables. It was the last thing they heard before they fell asleep and the first thing they heard when they woke up. Remember, in the 25th year after the massacre, Admiral Grace died. She was 78 years old. She had spent the last quarter century training the next generation of military leaders. She had taught them everything she knew about tactics and strategy, but more importantly, she had taught them something else. She had taught them to wait. Patience is a weapon, she told them. The think in centuries, we must think in generations. They believe they broke us. Let them believe it. Let them grow comfortable. Let them forget that we ever existed as a threat. And when they have forgotten everything, we will remind them. She died in her sleep, surrounded by the students she had trained. Her last word was the same word she had spoken to an emperor 25 years before. Remember. Her students carried her body to a simple grave. They did not mark it with a stone or a monument. Grace had asked them not to. She said that the only monument she needed was the future they were building. They did not notice her death. She was just one human among billions. Her name appeared briefly in an intelligence report and was immediately forgotten. That was exactly what she had wanted. In the 26th year, the preparations accelerated. Ships began to gather in hidden locations throughout human space. Soldiers moved to their assigned positions. Weapons were distributed through networks that had been carefully constructed over decades. Everything was ready, everything except the timing. A council met in a room that did not officially exist, on a station that appeared on no map. There were 50 people at the table, representing every aspect of the plan. They had been working toward this moment for their entire lives. Some of them had been born after the massacre. They had never known a world without the word. A man named Benjamin Drake stood at the head of the table. He was 60 years old, the son of 2 Endeavour survivors. His parents had been among the adults released by the. They had carried the word back to human space. They had raised their son to be what he was now. The question before us, Benjamin said, is simple. When do we begin? A woman named Cole spoke up. She was 81 years old, one of the oldest people in the room. She had been 6 when her brother and 2 sisters were killed on the Endeavour. We begin when we are certain of victory, she said. Not a moment before. We have waited 26 years. We can wait longer if we must. Our enemy thinks in, we must think the same way. The council debated for 3 days. They examined every detail of the plan. They considered every possible response from the. They ran simulations and analyzed data and argued over probabilities. In the end, they agreed on a date. It would be the 27th anniversary of the massacre, the day when humanity would finally respond to the message they had sent. The meeting ended. The council members returned to their homes and their jobs and their ordinary lives. They told no one what had been decided. They simply waited as they had been trained to wait. One more year. One more year of silence. One more year of pretending to be broken. And then the galaxy would learn what the word really meant. Remember. It was not a plea. It was not a lament. It was not the cry of a defeated people. It was a declaration of war. And the war was about to begin. The day of silence began like any other day in the Empire. Ships traveled their regular routes. Workers reported to their stations. The machinery of a civilization that spanned 17 galaxies continued to turn without interruption. And then everything changed. At exactly midnight, Galactic Standard Time, human ships appeared at 17 border stations simultaneously. They did not come through normal space. They emerged from a dimension that scientists had studied for centuries and declared impossible to navigate. Daniel Cooper had proved them wrong. The ships were not like anything they had seen before. They were fast and silent and deadly. They carried weapons that Lane had designed, weapons that could disable technology without harming the living beings who operated it. The border stations fell in minutes, not destroyed, captured. The humans wanted them intact. Admiral Benjamin Drake stood on the bridge of the carrier Remembrance, watching reports stream in from across the fleet. He was 62 years old now, and he had been preparing for this moment since before he was born. All border stations secured. his tactical officer reported. "Casualties minimal. Forces are confused. They do not understand how we appeared without warning." Benjamin nodded. "Move to Phase 2. The second wave targeted military production centers. These were massive facilities that manufactured the weapons and ships that kept the Empire in power. They were spread across 3 galaxies, protected by the best defenses technology could provide. The defenses did not matter. Lane's biological agents were released into the atmosphere of each facility. The agents were invisible and odorless. They passed through air filters and security systems without triggering any alarms. They settled on machinery and began to eat. Within hours, every military production center in the Empire had stopped working. The machines simply fell apart, their components dissolved by agents that affected only specific materials. The workers were unharmed. They stood among the ruins of their factories and stared in disbelief. The third wave was something different, something that they had never expected. Human ground forces landed on colony worlds. They came in thousands of ships, carrying millions of soldiers, but they did not come to fight They came to free the slaves. The Empire had conquered 1,200 species over 9,000 years. Billions of beings lived in bondage, serving masters who considered them less than animals. They had been born into slavery. Their parents had been slaves. Their grandparents had been slaves. They did not remember a time when their people were free. Human soldiers broke open the doors of their prisons. Human voices told them that the chains were coming off. Human hands helped them stand up and walk into the light. The slaves did not understand at first. Freedom was a word from old stories, something that had happened to their ancestors in a time before memory. It could not be real. But it was real. The humans gave them food and water and medicine. They gave them weapons if they wanted them. They gave them a choice that no one had offered them in thousands of years. "You can stay here," the humans told them. "Or you can fight with us. The choice is yours. You are free now." Some of them stayed. They were too broken, too afraid, too lost to understand what was happening. But most of them chose to fight. The rebellion spread across the Empire like fire through dry grass. Species that had been conquered ago remembered their own lost children. They remembered their own massacres. They remembered words that their ancestors had whispered in the dark. They were not just fighting humans now. They were fighting the entire galaxy. Received the reports in his throne room. His advisors came to him with faces full of fear, bringing news that grew worse with every hour. "The border stations have fallen. Our production facilities have stopped working. The slave populations are revolting on 30,000 worlds. Our fleet commanders are requesting orders, but we cannot reach half of them." The Emperor listened to each report with a face that showed nothing. He was 9,000 years old. He had survived 100 crises. He would survive this one. "Send the reserve fleet to the border," he ordered. "Put down the slave revolts with maximum force. Find out how the humans are traveling through space and stop them." His advisors hurried to obey, but the orders came too late. The reserve fleet moved toward the border, but human ships appeared behind them and cut off their supply lines. The fleet was stranded in empty space, unable to fight or retreat. The forces sent to crush the slave revolts found that the slaves had weapons now. Not just human weapons, but weapons they had made themselves, using knowledge that had been passed down in secret for generations. The revolts grew stronger instead of weaker. And no one could figure out how the humans were moving through space. Their ships appeared and disappeared without warning, striking targets that should have been impossible to reach. Watched his empire crumble. He had ruled for 9,000 years. He had conquered more worlds than the stars could number. He had broken more species than history could record. And now he was losing everything. On the 47th day of the war, A message arrived at the imperial palace. It came through channels that should have been secure, delivered by methods that should have been impossible. "The Human Confederation requests a meeting," the message said. "We wish to discuss terms. Our delegation will arrive tomorrow." His advisors urged him to refuse. It was a trap, they said. The humans would try to assassinate him. They could not be trusted. But the emperor was tired. He had lived for 9,000 years, and he had never felt tired before. Now he felt it in every part of his body. "Let them come," he said. "I want to understand how this happened." The delegation arrived the next day. There were 5 humans, all of them unarmed. They walked through the halls of the imperial palace as if they owned them. Their leader was an old woman with white hair and a cane. She walked slowly, but her eyes were sharp and clear. She looked at without fear. The cosmic emperor had faced 1,000 enemies. He had made them all beg for mercy. This woman did not look like she would ever beg for anything. "I am Cole," she said. "I have come to deliver a message." Looked at her and speak. 27 years ago, said, "You killed 5,731 children. You thought this would break humanity. You thought fear was the only language that lasted." She took a step closer to the throne. "You were wrong." Cole stood before the throne of the cosmic emperor. She was 81 years old. Her body was weak and her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was strong. 27 years ago, she said, I was 6 years old. I had a brother named Christopher. He was 12. I had 2 sisters, Emma and Lucy. They were 9 and 7. My mother put them on the Endeavor because she wanted them to have a better life on a new world. She kept me home because I was too young for the journey. Watched her with his 3 red eyes. He said nothing. I never saw them again, continued. My mother received word of what happened. She did not survive the grief. She died 3 months later. My father raised me alone. He taught me many things, but the most important thing he taught me was a single word. She paused. The throne room was silent. "Remember." Shifted on his throne. For the first time in 9,000 years, he felt something that might have been discomfort. "You have come to gloat," he said. "To celebrate your victory, I understand. I have seen this before. Conquered peoples always want to see their conquerors fall." "No," said, "I have not come to gloat. I have come to answer a question." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small data chip. It was no larger than a fingernail. She placed it on the floor in front of the throne. 27 years ago, you asked Admiral Grace a question. You asked her why humanity would resist, why we would fight against an empire that had ruled for 9,000 years, why we would not simply accept our place in the galaxy. Remembered. He remembered the woman her face wet with tears, her voice barely a whisper. "She told you to remember," said, "but you did not understand. You thought it was the cry of a broken spirit. You thought it was meaningless." She took another step forward. The guards moved to stop her but raised a hand. He wanted to hear what she had to say. "That data chip contains the names of every child who died on the Endeavor," said. 5,731 names, their ages, their dreams, the things their families remember about them. She looked directly into the Emperor's eyes. There was a girl named Amy Cooper. She was 9 years old. She wanted to be a veterinarian. She packed a stuffed rabbit named Captain Bounce in her bag. Her father spent 20 years designing the navigation system that brought our ships through dimensions you said were impossible. Was silent. There were twin boys named and Leo Lane. They were 11 years old. They loved to race each other through the corridors of their home station. Their mother spent 20 years studying your biology. She found your weaknesses, all of them. The Emperor's hands gripped the arms of his throne. There was a baby named Sophie Graham. She had just learned to laugh. Her grandmother spent 20 years training soldiers. She taught them patience. She taught them planning. She taught them to wait for this moment. His voice grew stronger. Every child on that ship had a story. Every child had people who loved them. Every child left behind someone who would spend the rest of their life working toward this day. She gestured at the data chip on the floor. That is what the word means. Remember, it is not a cry of pain. It is not a plea for mercy. It is a promise that we will never forget, a promise that we will never stop, a promise that we will carry the names of our dead with us until the end of time. Finally spoke, his voice was quiet. What do you want? Want almost smiled. We do not want anything. We have already taken everything. Your empire is finished. Your military is destroyed. Your slaves are free. Your legacy is ash. She turned and began to walk toward the door. The other members of the delegation followed her. Wait said. Stop but did not turn around. What happens now? The emperor asked. Will you execute me? Parade me through your worlds as a trophy? Use me to demonstrate your power? Was silent for a moment. Then she turned her head slightly, just enough to see him. No, she said. We will do something worse. We will let you live. Did not understand. Live. You will live, said. You will watch as your empire falls apart. You will see your conquests reversed. You will witness your species becoming just another civilization among thousands, no more powerful than any other. And every day, for the rest of your very long life, you will remember what you did. She reached the door and paused one final time. That is the lesson we wanted to teach you. Fear is not the only language that lasts. Memory lasts longer, and humanity has a very, very long memory. She walked out, the doors closed behind her. Sat alone in his throne room. The data chip lay on the floor in front of him, catching the light from the windows. He could not stop looking at it. 5,731 names. He could have his servants sweep it away. He could have it destroyed. He could pretend it did not exist. But he did not. Instead, he climbed down from his throne. His ancient bones ached as he bent to pick up the chip. He held it in his palm and stared at it for a long time. Then he inserted it into a reader. The names began to scroll across his vision, thousands of them, each one followed by an age and a few words about who they had been. Amy Cooper, 9 years old, wanted to be a veterinarian. Lane, 11 years old, loved to run. Leo Lane, 11 years old, always tried to beat his brother. Sophie Graham, 6 months old, had just learned to laugh. The list went on and on. Read every name, he read every age, he read every small detail. It took him hours. When he finished, he understood. He finally understood what the word meant. He understood why Admiral had said it with tears on her face and fire in her heart. He understood why humanity had waited 27 years instead of attacking immediately. They had wanted him to know. They had wanted him to feel the weight of what he had done. They had wanted him to understand that his empire had not fallen because of superior weapons or better technology or clever strategy. It had fallen because of a word. Remember. The Cosmic Emperor had ruled the 17 galaxies for over 9,000 years. He had conquered more worlds than the stars could number. He had broken more species than history could record. And in the end, he had been defeated by the thing he understood least. Love. The love of parents for their children. The love that refused to forget. The love that waited for generations. The love that built weapons and ships and armies not out of hatred, but out of a fierce determination to ensure that the dead were not forgotten. Sat on the floor of his empty throne room, holding a data chip that contained 5,731 names. And for the first time in 9,000 years, the Cosmic Emperor wept. Somewhere across the galaxy, in a small cemetery on Earth, the grave of Admiral Grace received its first visitors in many years. Cole stood before the unmarked stone, her white hair blowing in the wind. "We did it," she whispered. "We remembered, just like you told us to." The wind carried her words away, but she felt certain that somehow Grace heard them. The war was over, the empire had fallen, the children were avenged, and humanity would never forget. Remember,